My wife cheated on me with her boss, convinced me to sign over our $200, $0 family savings and the house, then she left me for him. Then I found out they faked the breakup, and now I'm fighting in court over millions in hidden assets. I never thought I'd be the guy sitting here, writing about how my wife, Lisa, turned out to be the kind of person who would cheat on me with her boss, then manipulate me into signing over our life savings and the house, only to leave me for him. Honestly, it all started so subtly I almost didn't notice. At first, I just thought she was working late a lot, or maybe she was stressed with her job at the marketing firm. Lisa's always been a bit bitchy, quick to lie when she thought she could get away with it, but I trusted her. We'd been together for 10 years, married for 5, and I thought we had a solid foundation. Looking back now, I see all the little signs I ignored. She started hiding her phone more, locking it when she was in the bathroom or in bed. She'd get calls late at night, and I'd catch her whispering or quickly deleting texts. At first, I brushed it off, telling myself she was just stressed or maybe talking to a friend. But then the inconsistencies started piling up. Her stories about where she was going didn't match up. One day, I decided to check her phone when she was in the shower. I didn't plan to snoop, but curiosity got the better of me. That's when I saw the messages. It wasn't just some innocent flirtation. These were explicit, dirty texts with her boss, Mark. They were talking about sneaking around, about being careful so nobody would find out. I saw plans to meet up after work, details about their sexcapades, and even references to how she convinced me to sign over our savings so she could start fresh with Mark. My stomach dropped. I couldn't believe it. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, was sleeping with her boss and lying to my face. I felt a mixture of rage, betrayal, and utter heartbreak. I had no idea how long this had been going on, but the fact that she'd manipulated me into giving her our entire savings, $200, plus the house, all under the guise of building a future, just made it worse. She kept telling me how much she loved me, how she wanted to fix our lives, and that everything was just a misunderstanding. Meanwhile, she was planning her escape with Mark. I remember holding the phone in my hand, trembling, realizing I'd been played like a damn fool. The worst part was, she didn't even try to deny it when I confronted her. I'd caught her red-handed, her face flushing, caught in the act. I told her I knew everything, and she just looked at me with that bitchy smirk, saying, "Oh, you're overreacting, it's not what you think. Mark and I are just friends, you're paranoid, you're jealous." But I knew better. I could see the lies she was trying to spin. She insisted she needed to find herself, that she was stressed out and making stupid mistakes, and that it was just sex, that it didn't mean anything. Yeah, right. But what cut the deepest was her betrayal of our shared life. We had built something, and she just threw it away for a guy who clearly didn't love her. She told me she'd been unhappy, that I was distant, that I didn't pay enough attention. That was her excuse for cheating, like I was the problem, not her. I felt numb, like I'd been punched in the gut. I'd trusted her with everything, and she'd been screwing around behind my back for months, maybe longer. It was like waking up from a nightmare, only this nightmare was real and I couldn't wake up. From that moment, everything changed. I started looking into her phone, her emails, her bank accounts. I wanted to know exactly how deep this went. And it didn't take long to find out she'd already started planning her escape. New bank accounts in her name, fake receipts, and even a fake breakup story she'd told her friends about how we just grew apart. All lies. She faked the whole thing to cover her tracks. I remember sitting in my living room, staring at the pile of evidence I'd gathered, feeling like I'd been hit by a freight train. My mind was racing. How could she do this? How could she lie so effortlessly, manipulate me into giving her everything, and then just walk away? I felt humiliated, furious, and broken all at once. I knew I had to do something, but I also knew I couldn't let her get away with it, not without a fight. That's when I started planning. I didn't want just to confront her and get angry. I wanted justice. I wanted her to pay for what she'd done, not just emotionally, but financially too. I didn't trust her anymore, not after all the lies. And I knew Mark wasn't just some random guy. He was a manipulative, selfish bastard who'd been using her just as much as she'd been using him. I'd find out how much money she'd stolen, how deep her deception ran, and I was going to make sure she paid for it. The initial shock wore off, replaced by a cold determination. I'd been betrayed so badly I didn't even recognize myself anymore. I had to rebuild, but first, I had to take her down. I wasn't going to let her walk away without consequences. I was going to fight for what was mine, for the truth, and for the dignity she tried to strip from me. That's where I am now, waiting for the next move, knowing that this isn't over, not by a long shot. After I found out everything, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept spinning, replaying all the moments I missed, the signs I ignored, and the lies she told me. Lisa, my wife, had always been a bitchy, manipulative woman, but I never thought she'd go this far. I had trusted her with everything, our savings, our home, my life, and she had just taken it all for her affair with Mark. It felt like a punch to the gut every time I thought about her lying to me, convincing me to sign over our house and our money, all while she was sneaking around with her boss. I decided I needed to get some clarity, so I started digging deeper into her financials. That's when I found out she'd been secretly opening bank accounts in her name, hiding assets, and even transferring money. I knew she was planning to run, but I didn't know she'd already started. She told her friends she was taking a break, that she needed time to find herself, but I knew better. I had proof she'd been planning her escape for months, probably since she started her affair. One night, I got a call from a private number. I hesitated, but then I answered. It was a woman's voice, clear, cold, and confident. She told me her name was Jessica and she was Mark's wife. I almost didn't believe it, but she confirmed everything I suspected. Mark and Lisa had been having sex at his apartment, in his office, even in our bed. Jessica told me they'd been planning to run away together with all the money she'd managed to steal from us. She handed me a list of bank accounts, some in Lisa's name, some in Mark, with hundreds of thousands of dollars. The shock hit me like a freight train. I'd been played for a fool. My wife, my partner, was sleeping with her boss and planning to take everything I had. Jessica's voice was cold but precise, and she warned me that Lisa was planning to leave the country soon, using a fake identity. I felt my blood boil. I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't let her get away with it. The next day, I contacted a lawyer. I needed to stop her, freeze those accounts, and get some legal footing. That's when I learned the full extent of her deception. She'd forged documents, lied about her income, and convinced me to sign over the house with false promises of a better future. I realized how much she'd manipulated me, how she'd convinced me I was the problem, that I wasn't good enough, so I'd sign away everything just to keep her happy. But now, I saw her for what she really was, a selfish, lying bitch who would do anything for money and her own pleasure. I also discovered she'd convinced her boss, Mark, to go in on a business venture that was really just a cover for their money laundering scheme. They'd been funneling money through fake companies, hiding assets, and planning to disappear. I found emails where Lisa was bragging about how smart she was for convincing me to sign everything over, how she'd finally won. It made me sick to read how she saw herself, like she was some queen who could manipulate and steal her way to happiness. In that moment, I realized I couldn't just sit around and wait for her to run. I had to fight back. I contacted Jessica to get more details about their plans, and I started gathering evidence, screenshots, bank statements, emails. I knew I was about to get into a legal battle, but I didn't care. I wanted her to pay, not just emotionally, but financially too. I had worked hard for that money, and I wasn't going to let her take it all without a fight. I also started to suspect that Mark had been cheating on Jessica, which made me smile bitterly. The guy who thought he was so clever, screwing over his wife and stealing millions, was probably just as much of a lying, cheating bastard as Lisa. It all felt like a tangled web of lies and betrayal, and I was determined to untangle it all. I knew I had to be smart, patient, and ruthless. I wasn't just fighting for my money. I was fighting for my dignity. I realized Lisa's entire scheme was built on lies, manipulation, and greed. Now, I had the evidence I needed to expose her, and I was going to make sure she paid for what she'd done. I wasn't going down without a fight. The game was on, and I was ready to win. Once I had all the evidence laid out, bank transfers, emails, fake documents, I knew I couldn't just go to the police or file a quick divorce. Lisa was slick. She'd covered her tracks well enough that if I didn't act fast, she'd slip away with everything. I decided to hire a private investigator to follow her, see if she was really planning to leave the country, and to confirm my suspicions about her and Mark's sneaky plans. The pie came back with some shocking intel. She'd already booked a one-way ticket to Mexico for herself and Mark. They had fake IDs ready, and she transferred a good chunk of the stolen money into offshore accounts. That was the moment I realized I'd been played for a fool, but I also knew I had to move fast to stop her before she disappeared with everything. I got a temporary restraining order against Lisa and Mark, freezing all their accounts and preventing her from leaving the country. I also worked with my lawyer to file for full custody of our house and to claim the money she'd stolen. It was a brutal process, fighting in court against a woman I'd loved, who was now nothing but a liar and a thief. But I had the evidence, and I was determined to get justice. During this whole process, Lisa's attitude was infuriating. She kept lying, claiming she was just stressed, that I was overreacting, and that she and Mark were just friends. She even had the nerve to cry and play the victim, saying I was ruining her life. Honestly, I wanted to punch her in the face every time she tried to spin her lies. She acted like she was the victim here, like she was entitled to everything she took, and I was just some jealous idiot. Meanwhile, Mark was just as bad. He denied knowing anything about her plans to leave, but I knew better. I found more emails where he was telling Lisa how hot she looked, how they'd be rich beyond their wildest dreams, and how they were going to start over somewhere new. It was clear they'd been scheming together for months, probably since she convinced me to sign over our savings. The emotional toll was intense. I went from feeling numb to furious, then to sadness. I kept asking myself how I'd been so blind. How could the woman I loved turn out to be this manipulative, selfish bitch? It's a terrible feeling to realize someone you trusted so much was just using you as a stepping stone for her own greed and pleasure. Every day, I'd wake up and see her smiling in my mind, and then I'd remember what she'd done. It tore me apart. But somewhere in that chaos, I found a strange clarity. I realized I couldn't fix what she'd broken, but I could control how I responded. I decided to fight for what was rightfully mine and to rebuild my life. I told my lawyer to push for full financial restitution. She drained our savings, but I was going to get it back, or at least as much as I could. I also made the tough decision to file for divorce, knowing that staying married to a woman like her was no longer an option. The legal battle dragged on for months. Meanwhile, Lisa and Mark kept trying to manipulate the system, but I had the evidence, and I had the law on my side. I watched as her carefully crafted lies started unraveling. The fake IDs, the offshore accounts, the staged breakup stories, they all came crashing down. I was angry, yes, but I also felt a strange sense of relief. I was finally taking back control of my life, and I was going to make sure she paid for what she'd done. In the end, I learned a lot from this nightmare. Trust is fragile, and people will lie, cheat, and manipulate if they think they can get away with it. I also learned that sometimes you have to fight dirty to get your justice. I may have lost my wife, my savings, and my sense of security for a while, but I'm still standing. I'm rebuilding from the ashes, and I'm doing it without her. That's the only way I know how, by fighting for what's right and never letting anyone manipulate me again. The court hearings were a roller coaster of emotions. Every day I sat there, listening to Lisa and her lawyer spin their lies, trying to convince the judge that she was innocent, that everything was a misunderstanding. She had this bitchy smirk on her face the entire time, acting like she was the victim, playing the victim card better than anyone I'd ever seen. She claimed she'd only been trying to find herself, that her affair with Mark was just a mistake, and that I was overreacting. Honestly, I wanted to scream at her, tell the court how much she'd lied and manipulated, but I kept my cool. Meanwhile, Jessica was there, testifying against Lisa, confirming she'd been planning her escape for months. Jessica handed over emails, bank statements, and even recordings of Lisa discussing her plans to leave with Mark. I watched as the court clerk flipped through the evidence, and I felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I'd get some justice. The most shocking moment came when Lisa's lawyer tried to claim that I was mentally unstable and trying to sabotage her future. That was a classic move, trying to paint me as the crazy husband so the judge would dismiss my claims. But I had everything on my side. The evidence was overwhelming. I had proof she'd been lying about the money, about her plans, and about her relationship with Mark. In the courtroom, I saw her face fall when the judge ordered the freeze on her assets and prohibited her from leaving the country. That was a victory of sorts, at least temporarily. But I knew this fight wasn't over. Lisa's manipulative ways ran deep, and I had to be ready for whatever she threw at me next. Behind the scenes, I was working with my lawyer to prepare for the next phase, seeking full financial restitution, custody of our house, and exposing her schemes to the authorities. I had uncovered enough to show she'd lied about her income, forged documents, and transferred stolen money into offshore accounts. The more I dug, the more I realized how deep her deception went. It wasn't just a marriage gone bad. It was a carefully planned scam. One day, I received a call from the prosecutor's office. They opened an investigation into the offshore accounts and money laundering scheme tied to Lisa and Mark. I felt a strange mixture of relief and anger. Relief, because finally someone was taking this seriously. Anger, because I knew it was just the beginning of a long legal battle. Throughout all this, Lisa kept up her act, crying, pleading, claiming she loved me and that she was sorry for everything. She told the court she'd made a mistake, that she'd never do anything to hurt me. But I knew better. I'd seen her true face, the manipulative, selfish bitch who betrayed everything we had for a quick thrill and a fat paycheck. I couldn't believe I'd been so blind for so long. In the quiet moments, I'd sit alone and think about how she'd convinced me to sign over the house and our savings. She'd guilt-tripped me, played the victim, and made me feel like I was the one at fault. I remembered her bitchy smirk, the way she'd lie so effortlessly, and how she'd look right in my eyes and tell me everything was fine. All the while she was planning her escape, using me as a pawn. That realization made me sick, but I also knew I had to stay strong. I couldn't let her get away with it. I was determined to see this through, to fight for every penny she stole, to make her pay for the pain she caused. I had no illusions about how deep her deception went, but I was ready. I had the evidence, the law on my side, and the resolve to see this mess through to the end. This whole experience has taught me a brutal lesson. Trust is fragile, and some people will do anything for money and pleasure. But it's also shown me that even in the darkest moments, you can find a way to stand up and fight back. I don't know what the future holds now, but I do know one thing. I'm not letting her walk away with my life, my money, or my dignity. Not anymore. The months following the court hearings were a blur of legal battles, financial investigations, and emotional exhaustion. I threw myself into the fight, determined to claw back what Lisa and Mark had stolen, and to finally put an end to this nightmare. Every day, I received new documents, new evidence, and new reasons to believe I was finally getting closer to justice. But at the same time, I was battling my own feelings, anger, betrayal, and a deep sense of loss that never quite went away. I remember sitting across from my lawyer one afternoon, staring at the mountain of paperwork that was supposed to be our family's future. Lisa's lies had spun such a web that it took a team of experts just to untangle her financial schemes. She'd opened accounts in fake names, transferred millions into offshore holdings, and even faked documents to make it look like she'd earned more money than she actually had. It was obvious she'd been planning her escape for months, maybe even years. The most shocking thing was discovering how deeply she'd lied about her intentions. Every time I thought I had her cornered, she'd come back with another lie, another fake story. She'd claim she was just trying to save her marriage, that she'd made a mistake, that she was sorry for hurting me. But I knew better. I'd seen the evidence, emails where she discussed her plans to leave, texts where Mark promised her a new life in Mexico, offshore accounts, and fake receipts for expenses that were just cover stories. The emotional toll was brutal. Sometimes I'd wake up feeling numb, other times furious. I'd spend hours just staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. The lies, the manipulations, the betrayal. I kept asking myself how I'd missed the signs. How I'd let her convince me to sign over our entire life savings, our house, everything. I thought I was protecting us, but in reality, I'd been blind to the fact that she was just using me as a stepping stone. I also started to realize how much of her plan hinged on her ability to lie and manipulate everyone around her. She told her friends she was taking a break, that she needed to find herself, all the while planning her new life with Mark. I even found out she'd been telling her family she was just stressed, that she loved me but needed space. The woman was a master at spinning stories, and I was just a pawn in her game. One day, I got a call from the authorities. They'd found her in Mexico, trying to set up a new identity. The offshore accounts had been frozen, and the court issued a warrant for her arrest on charges of fraud and money laundering. Hearing that made everything feel a little more real. She was finally caught, but I knew the fight wasn't over yet. I still had to get my money back, and I still had to deal with the devastating emotional aftermath. I started working with a forensic accountant to trace every penny she'd stolen. It turned out the total was far more than I originally thought, millions that she'd hidden in various shell companies, offshore accounts, and fake investments. I felt a mix of rage and helplessness. How could she do this? How could she lie, cheat, and steal from the person she claimed to love? The betrayal cut so deep I wondered if I'd ever recover. Throughout this process, I was also dealing with the fallout of her lies on my mental health. I sought therapy, trying to make sense of the mess she'd created. I learned to detach from the pain, to focus on rebuilding my life. I realized that the person I was before was gone, replaced by someone hardened but wiser. I couldn't trust her anymore, but I could trust myself to move forward. Looking back, I see how much I was manipulated. She played me like a pawn in her game, convincing me to sign away everything in the hope of saving our marriage. But it was just a ploy, a way to get what she wanted without facing the consequences. The biggest lesson I learned is that people are capable of incredible deception when greed and selfishness take over. Now I'm in the process of reclaiming what's mine, fighting in court for the assets she tried to hide, and trying to piece my life back together. It's a long road, and I don't know if I'll ever fully trust again, but I do know I'll never let anyone manipulate me that way again. I've learned that sometimes the only way to survive betrayal is to fight back harder than they ever expected. And that's exactly what I plan to do, until I get every last dollar back and restore my dignity. Now, sitting here reflecting on everything, I realize how much this ordeal changed me. I used to think love and trust were enough to keep a relationship solid, but I've learned that greed, manipulation, and betrayal can tear everything apart in a heartbeat. Lisa was a manipulative bitch who thought she could get away with anything, lying, cheating, stealing, and she almost did. Almost. But I was relentless in fighting for what was mine, and I didn't let her destroy my life without a fight. The court finally ruled in my favor. They ordered her to pay back every dollar she stole, and Mark's offshore accounts were seized. I got most of the money back, though I know some of it was lost in the process. It's not about the money anymore, it's about the principle. She thought she could manipulate me, use me, then walk away with everything, but I proved her wrong. Justice isn't always swift, but sometimes it's worth the wait. From this, I've learned a lot about people and myself. I've learned that some betrayals cut deeper than words, and that no amount of money can buy back trust once it's broken. I've also learned that the human capacity for greed and deception is frightening. People will lie, cheat, and manipulate if they think they can get away with it. But I've also learned that resilience matters. I refused to let her destroy my life, and I fought for my peace, my dignity, and my future. I've started rebuilding, not just financially but emotionally. I've cut out the toxic people, her, Mark, her family who blindly believed her lies, and I've focused on myself. Therapy helped me process the pain, and I've found new purpose in moving forward. I still get angry sometimes, still replay the worst moments, but I remind myself that I survived. I came out stronger. If there's one thing I want anyone reading this to take away, it's this: trust is fragile. Be careful who you let into your life. Watch for the signs, things like secretive behavior, lies, or sudden changes in attitude. People who manipulate and deceive don't change overnight, and they often do it under the guise of love or stress. Don't ignore the red flags, no matter how much you want to believe in someone. Because once that trust is broken, it's almost impossible to get back. And finally, never underestimate your own strength. I thought I was just a Chinese letter guy, someone who believed in love and honesty. But I discovered I was capable of fighting for what's right, of standing up against betrayal, and of rebuilding from the ashes. It wasn't easy, and I still have scars, but I know I'll be okay. I've learned that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply moving on and proving that you don't need a manipulative, lying partner to be happy. So, to anyone going through something similar, keep fighting. Trust yourself, keep your eyes open, and never let anyone steal your peace. You're stronger than you think, and sometimes, the only way to win is to refuse to give up.